Okay, should we start? There is a I shouldn't reclaim the host, right? Okay, so let's start this final open session of closing remarks. So we can reiterate some major findings, let's say, realizations that we came at during this conference. We may kind of conclude what we think the next steps are. Whatever you think is most pertinent as a conclusion from this 2 days of discussion. After that, we will retreat in the library of the Institute, where the researchers affiliated to this project and advocates, that we are also policy advocates, we will advocate for the solutions we will arrive at. Afterwards, we will retreat in the afternoon and discuss those, and soon after we will in a week or so, 10 days, let's say, we will come out with something public, at least a draft paper of the main conclusions and recommendations. So that will be, let's say, the outcome of the process, so that there will be some conclusions that will be available to the public, that will be out there. But prior to that, we would like to give the floor to everybody present at this moment, either in the Zoom or here. I don't know if this is going on YouTube. Okay, so to state your, let's say, general observations from this 2 days of discussion. So is there anybody who would like to start? You can perhaps build on what was said previously in the conversation with Marta, so that, you know, the discussion flows naturally, or maybe pick up on the debate that never truly ended, that Michal triggered about the EU enlargement. So whatever was the burning issue today can be, you know, further discussed by anyone present here. Marta is, I admitted her. Anybody in the audience? Yes?
You should move there.
Thank you for the opportunity. I would like to say one diagnosis and one comment. I was inspired by the lecture of Marta. That the fact that the reconciliation process between Poland and Germany started with the essence of need of common cooperation. For the issue, for the problem between Bulgaria and Macedonia, I think that we don't have this. We don't feel need that we don't feel that we need a mutual cooperation. I think that we as countries, we are in this process not because we feel that we need mutual cooperation, but because we have aims were different, and the aims are Macedonia, North Macedonia wants to be a member of European Union, and the Bulgaria wants to satisfy, I would say, the desire for historical truth. If we didn't have this, I'm afraid that we are not we don't feel this, which is essential, that we need mutual cooperation, as the Poland and the Germany, as I understood. We are here in this problem, not that we want to cooperate. I think so. So maybe first we need to work on ourselves to see this essential need that we need to cooperate, not like formally. And the second, which I want to make a comment. Marta said that Germany and Poland had centuries of burden of antagonism. In this point, we are lucky because we don't have centuries of antagonism. It's contra. Yes. We have centuries of unity, so we don't have 18th and 19th century as antagonism. We have 18th and 19th century, not to mention the Middle Ages. So we don't have a problems. The only problem is the border. I think that if we make a framework, like Marta said, for the future, which steps we need to do for the reconciliation, never mind about the other steps. I think that we can make 100 steps. If the first step is deleting the border, which means entering in the European Union, I am sure that after 2 decades, after 1 or 2 or the most 3 generations, this issue will be, nobody will need to talk about this, because the people will start doing this essentially, you know, and it will be natural process, and after 2 generations, the people will just be in a, like, what are we talking about? What our fathers were talking about in the beginning of the 21st century? Natural, we are one. We have so common. We don't have antagonisms, and it will be like a memory for some kind of comment. I think so. Thank you.
Thanks, Vasil. Some really good points here, and they kind of coincide with what we were discussing during the break. There should be a will for cooperation on both sides. So on the sides of both societies, but also both governments. I must admit that even though it might be a reaction of frustration or similar, the Macedonian authorities haven't been very cooperative in the past year. There has been sort of a stance of self-infantilization, expecting you know, the European Union or any of the bigger political brothers to intervene and solve the tension with Bulgaria that arose in the past 2 years. That is not the way. So some will of cooperation must be demonstrated from both sides. And the Macedonian elites, political elites, should realize that they need to actively engage in the process, just as it was done in the processes that preceded and were part of reaching the Prespa agreement. You cannot establish a framework of reconciliation. You cannot. So even if we convince the two sides, especially in this case the Bulgarian political side, that you know, the problem is more a problem of conflict, cultural conflict, and its resolution and reconciliation, therefore not a matter of establishing historical facts, but a deeper organic process of reconciliation that takes time, and a certain framework should be set up for this process that envisages that the process would be lengthy. Even if we agree that this is the way, and even if we, for example, convince let's say, the side that has the upper hand at this moment, which is the Bulgarian side, in this, we need to have a cooperative that does not mean submissive side on the participation on the Macedonian side. Participation does not mean submission and acceptance of everything that is served at the table by the Bulgarian side. Participation means being an active agent in the creation of the narrative that we will all agree on. So I'm kind of dovetailing on Vasil's comment, but also our conversation and during the break, basically. So somebody raised the hand. Gavor, was it you? Yeah. Yeah.
I hope it works. So I will pick up on this point of the common history not being burdened with very serious conflicts, but also on this issue of unity, sort of teasing, maybe we should look at the Austrian-German historical reconciliation instead of the, which wasn't, but actually there is one, what I will come back to, that could be interesting to look at. But what is important, I think, for drafting any kind of recommendations and not to get into a wrong track is really differentiate between two types of reconciliations, which are also entangled with a parallel process since the change of regime, namely the process of historical justice. All these commissions dedicated to memories of traumatic historical events or periods of historical oppressions, which very often were covered with the working of historical commissions who established, who presented reports. And these reports are actually taken as a kind of truth or telling the truth of something that was suppressed earlier. And here the use of the concept of truth together with history is very important, because there is a type of historical reconciliation, the Polish German, I think, belongs to this type, where there is a clear moral asymmetry between the parties. So it's not just about when there is something that one party should admit to, which is morally unacceptable and pertains to the other party. And here this morality also implies this kind of truth and entangles these processes of justice, historical justice commissions with historical reconciliations. But it means that if this moral asymmetry is not present, then I think the historical reconciliation is more about representing the different perspectives. And this is, I think, the case in the Bulgarian-Macedonian situation. So this is really important not to get into the falling into the trap of looking for a historical truth, and also avoiding to frame the conflict as a conflict of admitting past wrong deeds of any of the sides, because that will lead to that kind of historical justice track, and there it is very hard to get out of from focusing on truth, because that's the moral that creates that kind of normative moral obligation to tell the truth, because we are speaking of something that was oppressed, that was not talked about. This is, I think it's very very important. Yes, and the other issue is which I think we should look at, not necessarily for for solutions, because there's no solutions, but to see the logic of how these kind of historical conflicts could work, and the conflict itself fold out, is the Russian-Ukrainian case, because there you have this case of one part actually claiming the history of the other part. And the whole argument is over how much the Ukrainians had a history outside the Russian history. And there is a very strong attempt to make this kind of historical argumentation. The president himself published, or at least under the Russian president's name, Putin's name, are published articles which are dealing with historical issues, how to interpret Ukraine's history. So that could be really interesting to look at, because that would tell something about the logic of this kind of conflict we are looking at here. Okay, so thanks.
Gabor, what you're saying is that we should not go into the type of truth and reconciliation of the, you know, trauma, because this is not the nature of our conflict.
Frame the conflict this way, then you are getting the wrong.
It is already framed like that. We are traumatized by the Bulgarian occupation, etc., etc. But I think that from I don't know. This is a side remark. To me, this past 2 years are more traumatic than whatever I've heard of the history. Never mind. This was just a side remark.
Okay, no, I'm just
not to be taken seriously.
came back if I should react, but I don't think so. So
clarify. Okay, so anybody else who would like to add something to this discussion? Spasimir, and then Stefan.
Thank you, Katya. Indeed, it was. I think that it was a very fruitful today's exchange of thoughts and shared experiences. For me personally, two aspects appeared, and I'm very grateful to what Vasu said, because this is indeed the essence of this clash that we face today. On one hand, you have a unique opportunity on Bulgarian side in the context of European integration to push forward over a certain historical truth that was lost as an opportunity for 70 years. And on the other hand, we have the Macedonian perspective, the North Macedonian perspective, which is the argument that there is a European path to be followed, but it was not assuming that there is a need for reflection and any reconciliation with your own identity. And that makes it a very specific case. But I think from our discussions, two interesting aspects appeared. One is this, I think, issue that we can pursue in the future, that can be part of our next steps within the project, to think about exploring the way how national heroes among countries, or the hero of one and the enemy of other, are being handled within the historical books. I don't think, Mickiewicz is probably not the best case, but definitely an interesting personality. But we also have others, Bandera, the role of Piłsudski in terms of Poland. These are issues that are worth exploring, how the different historiographies look at the same personalities, and I think that even more importantly, how these different narratives do not take a leading role within the daily politics. I think this is the interesting phenomenon. On the other hand, because there were many examples, and what Gabor was mentioning also, these alternative models of reconciliation, alternative experiences within Central and Eastern Europe can deliver a number of I think inputs, but one thing that I personally find very interesting, and I don't know much, but maybe Gabor can support me here, is actually the question of Slovak-Hungarian relations, because if there is any phenomenon that kind of sheds light to a similar pattern of I would say logic, is the question of Slovakia as a country that was non-existent prior to the First World War. Secondly, as a political project that today is an independent state, but part of Czechoslovakia for a longer period of time. And how these animosities of the 1990s between the Slovaks and the Hungarians were practically suppressed within the context of European integration. The difference is, of course, that these two countries were marching in the same direction, so they had the shared common goal, which is missing here. But I think that still, those who remember the late 1990s, there was an enormous, I would say, political, a lot of political potential within the use of nationalist rhetoric in Slovakia. The famous ridiculous arguments about the Slovak tanks marching to Hungary and things like that were just a part of the, I would say, the political savoir vivre. Mecher was building around this, in a sense, on a skillful balancing with nationalists, his political power, and he was gone. He was replaced by this pro-European narrative that managed to reconcile these two issues. And I think this is also a phenomenon worth further elaboration. And I'm very happy that if I have to conclude in any way, that our today's discussions actually produced a perspective for next steps, which I think is a very important element of our cooperation. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Pasmir. I have the same impression that we kind of see a certain way through the tunnel or a possible map of navigation. It can be discerned from this discussions these 2 days. I think there has been some general agreement on the major points and methods, in particular methodology. So I'm taking a recommendation seriously about the comparative analysis of the Slovak-Hungarian reconciliation. And just a quick question, should we cooperate with Gabor on the issue and, look for sources and how it was executed, where to find sources on it, etc. Could you share those with us or with you? Okay. We will include that in the analysis, definitely, because it's been brought up several times as the most analogous case to the Bulgarian Macedonian. Okay, now Stefan has the floor.
Turn our attention to this, how both countries, Bulgaria and Macedonia, enter in 2017 in this process. It is true that the most important for the Macedonian side was the opportunity to enter NATO and the European Union. And it is also true that for the Bulgarian side, it was seen as a kind of opportunity to try to push the process in order to restore the historical truth, and especially what was called the common history. I mentioned yesterday during our closed workshop that it could be somehow defined between the middle of the 19th century and until the end of the First World War, when, because of many reasons, most of the cases that were presented yesterday and today are not could not be taken automatically in order to resolve the uniqueness of the Bulgarian-Macedonian dispute. And that was why yesterday I mentioned that the Hungarian-Slovak case is maybe close as far as before the First World War, there were Slovaks who identified themselves as Hungarians. And also maybe this parallel that was mentioned today, Russian-Ukrainian dispute about historical issues also could be relevant, because it is true, and that was why in the previous session I mentioned that Greece and to a great extent Bulgaria also didn't revise their own history in a way that German historiography did it after 1960s. And that is the reason why, being members of the European Union, they are, and their historiographies and their popular histories and the histories that are in the popular mind of Greeks and Bulgarians became at certain point an obstacle for the Macedonia to enter NATO and to enter the European Union. Because what for these 4 years Bulgarian side tried to achieve is somehow to revise the history and what happened after the First World War. And this process about which Katerina spoke today during our closed session, this process of bifurcation from some point in the decades, in the following decades, to be somehow deleted. But it is impossible to be deleted, because it is impossible to wait the Macedonians to give up the identity they established in these decades, their history and their identity, and what she mentioned, that cultural intimacy that was achieved in the decades after the Second World War, because also it is impossible even to look to the communist period with the same Bulgarian eyes and Macedonian eyes, because it's quite clear that after the Second World War, Macedonians have a chance to be in the better socialism than the Eastern European or the Bulgarian version. And all these factors should be taken into account when we recommend some solution of the historical disputes to our government in the following weeks, months, and years, until the moment when both countries will become, Macedonia will become the European Union member, supposedly after more or less a decade of negotiations, when all these problems could be resolved step by step, with, I hope, with the help of social sciences and humanities in both countries, if they are on the level to contribute to this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. These were some excellent concluding remarks. I can comment only that we're on the same page here with Stefan, as you know, all of us here, the experts affiliated to this project, we share the same ground, presupposing grounds of discussion. So Okay, now I give the floor to Marta, who raised a hand.
Yeah. Yeah, like I'm really interested what Gabor would said about Slovakia and Hungary reconciliation, but I have this kind of impression that what we are speaking about it here, like Macedonia and Bulgaria relation, it's really like unique case because we all like enter to the European Union at the same time. We focus on the different things, and actually we didn't even think about reconciliation. So somehow it is like being the part of European Union which teach us about each other, and like the tension are there. I think that it's what I said before. It's not that we have the reconciliation. It is just like that as we are all members of European Union, this kind of thing is not politicized. But I can remember a lot of like historical disputes about like Polish occupation of part of Czechoslovakia ahead of Second World War. It's still something which brings a lot of tension on the two borders. The question of Polish minority in Czechoslovakia is problematic, and also like relation from our perspective, because like I'm in the center, I'm working for the Central European Department and the Balkans. So we also followed the lot of tension between Slovakia and Hungary. And actually, it's also interesting that somehow after the entering to the European Union, this relation between two countries deteriorated significantly. Even the Visegrad cooperation was at risk at that time, and somehow two countries decided not to go to this direction. But it's not like that the issues were solved, and we can also, even in official comment, we can hear jokes about Upper Hungary, which is the Hungarian name for Slovakia sometimes. And you know, as far as I know, there is also no common history book. Just the Hungarian minority use the Hungarian books for in schools. So this creates some additional divisions. So it's, and I think this is like how the European Union operate. We are just not talking and not politicizing the difference which are there, and a lot of this kind of cooperation, personal contacts, which European Union enables, you know, creates this like positive feelings. And also, like I'm speaking right now about the Polish experience, that also the sensitivity to the different perspective grew in Poland in the recent years due to this personal contact. So we started to rethink our attitude towards Ukraine, towards Ukraine, but also to the neighbors in the European Union, and this is some kind of natural process. But you know, it's not like that we solve this issue in European Union. We just not talk about it. So that's my impressions. So in this sense, Macedonia and Bulgaria can set up some standards. I think
The other way around this case. Okay, so anybody else? We are nearing the end of this part of the program, the morning part of the program. Kostas wants to say something, and then
Yes.
Athens.
Thank you, Katerina. Just
Okay.
a couple of words. And first, I should apologize because I was not able to come to the closed session yesterday because I was teaching. I have learned quite a lot, you know, and many, I think, of the nuances of the situation. And what I wanted to contribute today was perhaps out of my experience with the Prespa agreement to just kind of record what were on that occasion, the key steps that led eventually to the agreement. Now, the first key step, I suppose, in a reverse order from what I've heard many of the colleagues mention here, was not to resolve the historiography. Was not to find a common history between Macedonia and Greece. Because as I think we fully understand, the question of history and the way that's been written, and some of the things that our Hungarian colleagues said yesterday were extremely, I think, pertinent to that point. The question of historiography cannot be resolved if and the nation state, I suppose, are the key reference around which histories are being written, particularly histories that are popular or historical textbooks for schools and so on and so forth. So history cannot be agreed, or certainly it cannot be the first issue from which we start. And we have to remember that history is not a kind of linear time. Temporality is not just a linear series of nouns, of presents that one, that one moves to the next. History, phenomenologically, both in our individual, I think, experience, but also historically for our communities and for our nations, history and time is not united, is not uniform. It is, we live simultaneously, and different communities live simultaneously in different historical cycles. And therefore, the idea of the historical cycle that was used in the Prespa case, that there is a different historical cycle in the Greek kind of memory and so on, and in the Macedonian, helped precisely to reconcile two narratives which were not on the face of it reconcilable, by accepting that that history is split, that there are different ways and different temporalities through which we live our lives and we understand our histories. But as I said, the first question for me is not history and historiography, but it is political will. This is the first thing that can help a reconciliation. It is political will, it is an understanding on both parts, which starts, of course, from different perspectives, that we have to resolve this issue. There has to be a will, a logic of solution. And that will or logical solution has to be, in a sense, expressed by the right political persons. It is political personalities that will do that. If we expect to change or to have a common understanding either of the historiography or the cultural understanding of cultural reciprocity, I don't think that will happen. So for me, it is political will, the right political personnel that has accepted the importance of a solution, and that once that has happened as a framework kind of agreement, that we want to resolve the problem, that both of us have an interest in a solution, but secondly, there are important moral considerations that I explained yesterday, which mean that in order to survive and to live together and to cohabit as neighbors, we have to resolve it. And then, of course, the role of the civil society and of initiatives like yours, Katerina, and of other colleagues, is precisely to find similar people, as we did with Greece and Macedonia, similar people in Bulgaria, those people who tend to be anti-nationalists, and of course, if you have a nationalist government, this will not happen, but to bring them together and start exchanging first information, but more importantly, cultural understanding, creating this cultural intimacy that you have mentioned, which happened in our case, and which allowed to have a kind of cultural moment that allowed the solution, but it was the political will that brought it through. So 3 steps, let me repeat and finish, I don't have very much more to contribute. Political will that starts from a minimum understanding, agreement that we have to move forward. We cannot continue in this kind of situation. Second, the right persons, and there is a question, who are the right political personalities and cultural leaders and so on who are going to do it. And we have to try and help find those people and tell those people that it is important that you take a certain prominence in public debate, in public exchange, political life, and so on. And third, I think the coming together in civil society of like-minded groups on both sides, which act in an ancillary, in an important role, but it is not that they will bring this thing to the end. 3 steps: political will for a solution, the right people, and cultural exchanges helping to create the correct atmosphere. Thank you.
Thanks, Kostas. Yes, this was very useful. It's kind of a mini guide as to what needs to be done, what is to be done. The truth is that Stefan Dechev and myself and Dimitar Bechev and Lupcho, people from 2 sides of the border, did initiate processes that you recommended, similar to this project. Already last year, we were kind of, you know, target of attacks of our own societies, respective societies on both sides. So Stefan was the traitor in Bulgaria, I was the traitor in Macedonia, etc. But we did engage in such processes, and there were other people as well. We organized a number of informal panels, etc. But unless you have a structure of a project such as this one, and you have, let's say, the seal of funds such as Visegrad Fund and Balkan Trust for Democracy, which is a USAID fund, which is very interesting that this very different groups of states support an initiative like this. So this is just a side remark. So unless you have this framing, you are not really taken seriously, and it is all on the shoulders of, you know, a couple of individuals. But those bridges, let's say initial first a small number of bridges, have existed even prior to this process. As for the right political persons, you're completely correct. I'm afraid that the only person who was really willing to strike a similar solution to that of Prespa was Zoran Zaev, but I think that he paid the price of losing even within his own party. I think that he is, you know, he has lost within his own party. This is, I mean, my impression from what's happening in the public. I even read here and there on, you know, some superficial political outlets, but still symptomatic. You know, they give you the symptoms, the feel of, you know, the cooler political gossip. You know, people mentioning like the political duo Crvenkovski and Zaev. They used to be opposed. Crvenkovski is, you know, not a huge fan of any kind of reconciliation in the region, and now we hear them presented as a unity, which is really super problematic. So I'm afraid we don't have a player at the moment on the Macedonian side.
On the persons, the key person in Prespa was Nikola Dimitrov. Nikos Kodzias in Greece and Nikola Dimitrov in Skopje. Now, of course, the prime ministers, Zaev and Tsipras, were important for the final decision. But the way in which this thing happened over a long period of negotiations, extreme detailed negotiations, was through the creation of a very good personal rapport between the two Nikos, the Nikos Kodzias and the Nikola Dimitrov. And it was that kind of personal kind of chemistry which worked, which allowed in a number of really big turning points to find a way to move through. So the initial agreement was between the two prime ministers, but it was the personal, what I call the personal chemistry between those two men, which and their teams, big teams behind them, which allowed them, because they started trusting each other, to keep moving. So that is why I insist on personalities. And of course, I don't know what the situation is now, but I would say that Dimitrov is a really good man in terms of working those kinds of difficult situations.
Now what is happening? Sorry, echo. Now what is happening is the exact opposite, I must say. Here you have to have a political backing in order to engage in processes like that. So Dimitrov was able to engage and, you know, in such processes and have a lead, an initiative, because he had the political back of the Social Democratic Party, which he was not a member of.
Of course.
But he had a strong political backing. And now he has a weak SDSM and weak Zoran Zaev. And on top of everything, he is actually showing least initiative to cooperate in the case of Bulgaria. So maybe our Nikos was good for Prespa, but I'm not sure if he is the right person to resolve the issue with Bulgaria. So I guess every situation demands their own Nikos. Atanas?
Hello. Basically, there is not so much to add to what I heard from Kostas, you and Stefan and Vasko Cvetkovski. But I just want to emphasize that really need the political will for this process to really embark. And obviously, also we need to change the goals on both sides. Unless we have a very strong political will for cooperation, not for just entering the European Union or for making historical truths, we will not have any success. One thing to mark is that lifting the veto is a one-off event which will happen in 3 days if it's decided. But the real process, as we all heard and we are convinced, will take a multi-year approach. And even with history, I will give a small example. We might not change our history so fast and our society culture so fast. But for example, we can even now do some monuments on certain periods that are omitted in Macedonian history, like the support of the Bulgaria during the anti-fascist fight and so on, which are symbolic signals which might change the mood of the entire population just by building one monument. And these are practical steps that can be taken even without having a complete revision of our history, which will definitely take many years and generations, as somebody else before me said. So what should be and unfortunately I'm also pessimistic that this will only happen based on the will of the two sides in the process. We definitely need the support of the European Union, stronger support raised in front of both countries. Recently, there was a big push towards Bulgaria, but reality is that similar push or even harder should be applied to all political parties in Macedonia, because we see that even now IMRO is basically refusing any agreement on the process of good neighborhood with Bulgaria, as said even yesterday during while our conference was happening. So definitely we need this in order to make this process stable, not just start and stop every 3 or 6 months with the changing of the political mood.
Czy ktoś chce dokładkę, Weroniko?
Thanks a lot. Marta speaking. Thanks a lot, Moscow. Good points. So your point reminded me of the title of a project and the premise of our conference, I'm sorry, and the premise of a project, that why we talk of a regional co-belonging or reinventing regional belonging beyond the EU divide or EU accession, because this reconciliation, this agreeable regional environment is necessary with or without the EU. So it shouldn't be seen like, you know, a pragmatic selling off of ourselves in order to enter the EU. So the process of reconciliation shouldn't be seen like that, like a currency of that sort. It should be a goal in and of itself. I agree with that. And really, Kostas is perfectly right. And this is the most depressing part. I'm hopeful that Bulgaria will now have a government that will be more cooperative, but I am so pessimistic that we currently don't have a really cooperative player on this side, and who that individual might be, I wouldn't even dare to guess, but let's hope that, you know, there is still some will, or maybe that the old Nikos will resurrect. Who knows? You never know.
That's why you are right.
Mhm.
That is why Katerina is right that the Bulgarian-Macedonian negotiations on the autumn of 2020, on the eve of Bulgarian veto, they don't have the person who was able to manage this process, because in Bulgaria there are impressions, especially among the Bulgarian Foreign Ministry, Bulgarian diplomats and people who dedicate it to Bulgarian Macedonian issues and negotiations, about the lack of cooperation in the end of the 2020 by the side of Nicola Dimitrov. If you analyze his interviews, especially because Katarina said that now Macedonian government has the credibility it has in the end of the 2020, because 2020 was after the elections and the Macedonian government, the second Zoran Zaev government, was just created. And they have many more space for maneuvering than they will have in the following months. At least this is my impression. And also the only gest that the Macedonian side made in the end of 2020 on the eve of veto was this interview that the Prime Minister Zoran Zaev gave to the Bulgarian agency Venues, which really seemed to like a solo action by Zaev, and behind him was not even his own party. And it's a pity, because we should somehow collaborate, as Nico said, more enlightened, liberal-minded people ready to cooperate on both sides in order to achieve some agreement, compromise, consensus. Otherwise, the nationalists are waiting, and they will always use the chance in order to receive the political and any other gains. Thank you.
Vasco, Ама пола сат доцни ме сакав да завршам. 5 minutes is already too much. 2 minutes. We are late for the afternoon session.
Something about this part of right personalities. I think that maybe it will look like some kind of неверно, чудно, unbelievable and untrue. But I think that in this situation and in the situations where the issue is tickled by nationalistic circles, maybe the right personalities, will be the nationalists. Maybe it will be the best scenario if we have nationalist government in Bulgaria and nationalist government in Macedonia, because by essence, the nationalists, they want to rule, they want power. And after that, when we will have this situation, and authorities from Europe to say to them, to both sides, what to do, because if they don't want to lose the power, and then they will make how to say, yes, and that's it.
I doubt that's a very
One sentence.
realistic scenario. We had Nikola Gruevski, and look what we ended up with. Look at the Disneyland.
That is right, and it was something that the very prominent Bulgarian journalist said during our focus group that we organized. He was not presented, but on the very focus group, but in private conversation with me, and I can quote him, and he said, it is the right moment where nationalists are in power, like it was the Bulgarian case with the Karakachanov as a coalition partner of Boyko Borisov. It is the right time to resolve the problem. But in order to resolve the problem, when in September, Karakachanov said that the veto is waiting, I think it was a big mistake from the Macedonian side to change the European-minded historian like Darko Stoyanov, put somebody else, because it was the first act. Even Karakachanov mentioned it in the first interview after the October meeting between both sides of the historical commission, that it is the bad sign from the Macedonian side. I wouldn't like to say that maybe Karakachanov is close to the historical narrative and will never subscribe to the historical narrative that is in our own minds. But somehow the government is a reality, government in Sofia and government in Skopje. And if you are a politician, you will try to act in the best possible way, having in mind the conjuncture and the context at the moment. Thank you.
I agree. I mean, your point is those statements were hostile, announcing the veto, but instead of reacting with more cooperativity and being proactive on our side, we became reactive and out of spite, let's say, put a more reactionary member in the historical commission. That was Gruevski's style with Greece, you know. He would just, after 2008, he'd do most of the things he did was out of spite. So, you know, like, oh, okay, we cannot enter NATO. Well, we're ancient Macedonians or whatever. We will build a monument of Alexander the Great at the center of Skopje. It was, you know, the showing the middle finger. And there was kind of, I agree with you that since the aggressive rhetoric of Karakachanov went a little bit mainstream by Zakhareva, that our side also started to be reactive.
Was that they didn't answer the real open provocation by Karakachanov in Zakhareva. It was good, but they stopped there.
No, my point is that the reaction was like that. Aha, okay, so then we will put this person in the commission. You see, that's the Gruevski style strategy. Unfortunately, no strategy whatsoever. But I think that we should maybe focus on the more systematic discussions presented by the keynote speakers this 2 days, the really systematic approaches presented by Marta, Kostas, Gabor as well. Michal's provocations were very interesting from this morning. They give an interesting angle on the whole perspective of the enlargement process. So maybe focus on those, you know, the bigger picture instead of the recent incidents between the two countries that we discuss. And if we focus on these recommendations that they gave us and on the bigger pictures, perhaps in plural, maybe we can come out with some useful conclusions and propositions from this event, as Pasimir is hopeful to think that we will. He said so. He sensed that we might come up with something. So we should close this session because we must move to a different venue. Okay. Am I close? Okay, it's usually you. So, but I will thank everybody. Yeah, actually, this is a general thanks of the entire program of the 2 days of discussion, of your previous contributions, of your contributions to come in the form of publications, on those that came here in person this 2 days and showed this immense patience and interest. My apologies to all those who couldn't connect yesterday. The streams are up there on the YouTube. You can follow from there, and you can also watch them afterwards. So thank you to all those who showed interest to follow us online or in Zoom. I think this has been a fruitful 2 day, and I think there is more to come out of this event.